Hey, geographers, welcome to another edition of Unit 3 Culture. Today we're focusing on cultural patterns. So, what patterns within a society, within a culture, um, of certain characteristics help you delineate one culture from the next? Not terribly difficult concepts to understand, but interesting ones nonetheless. So, if we step back and think of two major metropolitan cities that are fairly close to us. We have New York City, which is, very close, and we have Philadelphia, which is not too far away either. So, to someone from the West Coast or a different country or outer space, these two cities may seem very similar, right? English is the majority language. They both have ethnic enclaves. They both have Chinatowns, for example. They both have places that are important to our early history and our early republic. They both have, are on rivers, right? Like skyscrapers, lots of similarities. But if you were to spend time or someone from New York City or Philadelphia, you'll notice there are some cultural traits that are different, right? It's not like they're different country different, but they're different. So, for example, if you are from the Philadelphia area, you know about the Mummers Parade, and that's a way people often celebrate their New Year's holiday. Where in New York City, people around the country will tune in and watch the New York City Thanksgiving parade, and see the balloons, see the Snoopy, and I think they said it's Boy Scout Snoopy this year. If you're interested in which Snoopy it will be, different foods that they're known for, whether it's the tasty cake and the cheesesteak, or the Philadelphia pretzel, or a New York City could be the bagel, the pizza. I should have a photo of the pizza, right? Even in sandwiches, are they subs like in New York, or are they hoagies like they would be in Philadelphia? Sports, big part of local culture. Notice that is the same person. It's a very tough thing to talk about if you're a New York sports fan who are New York sports football. Not good right now. Eagles, not so bad. Let's see who knows who I'm talking about there. So those are just, examples. There's both places of worship in both cities. People both speak English, but the accents are different. Some of the slang, you're not going to hear someone in New York City saying the word jawn. And I'm sure there's some words from New York that you won't hear people talking in Philly. So um, if you grew up in New York, you could probably survive just fine in Philly and vice versa. But you'll notice cultural differences. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about the culture that makes a place a place. When I had a book I want to show you. So why do we notice these patterns? Why do we notice all those things from that last slide? Because things like your language, your religion, your ethnicity, all these characteristics are what make a place your place, right? It's more than just the physical location. So a place is that physical location, but it's the cultural characteristics that are added to it that make it a place. Place making is the act of consciously or unconsciously making that place a place, right? So, for example, we talk about Coca-Cola, Walmart's, McDonald's all over the world and having this globalizing effect. Yet you'll notice the menus might still be different. Certain advertising slogans or whatever might be different from place to place. So how does a certain culture, how does it work in that place? So I want to show you an example of place making. This was from an article just earlier this month of November 2024. This is from the city of Long Branch, so not terribly far away from here in New Jersey towards the shore. And it's about how the local government there is spending money for this public area and for a city hall park. And if we read it, it states that this money will be used for a brand new park with new amenities between City Hall and the library. So think of that, a government building and a library, a place where, people can go and meet and congregate and read and learn, right? So think of two culturally important parts to a town. But what are they going to do there? Brand new surfacing will be placed in this area with a new gazebo for concerts. So bringing in, music to the culture of an area. Other city events. Other parts of this project include new lighting and landscaping, right? They want this town to look, people have pride in it. They want it to look presentable. They want it to be safe. Also improvements to the library, right? A town that focuses on its library says something about it. It'll be a nice spot in the city for people to come read a book or listen to music. So by this act of placemaking, you're also sort of curating what kind of actions, what kind of culture you want. So you might maybe embracing what's already there, or you might be sort of trying to push it in a certain direction. Now, of course, this will probably also be used for kids that want to skateboard on it, right? Or who knows what else. But you'll see examples of placemaking all around us, right? Language is an important part to place, as you can imagine. Language can influence toponyms. This is one of our vocabulary words for this unit, so you want to make sure you have that down. Language also obviously influences communication, right? Whether people are speaking, writing, reading, texting, listening to a radio, how people are communicating. So a toponym, think of where that name comes from and what it says about a culture. So let's look at our own local cultures a little bit. If you may know this, hopefully in fourth grade New Jersey history, you local kids would have learned this, that Boonton comes from Boone Town. Boone was the 7th colonial governor, so that's like back before we were the United States, and that's where this name came from. Lincoln Park is named after our 16th president. That's Lincoln, you know this, right? For Jefferson, we have our, it was incorporated in 1804, which was the administration of Thomas Jefferson. That's who that was named after. Also, looking at the importance of cultural history, we also have lots of towns, too many to name, that are named after indigenous names. So Alamuki, Hoboken, Cheesequake, all native names. Here in Morris County, for example, Whippany. Whippany has to do something with the land of the willow trees that was good for making arrows. And Parsippany, another Lenni Lenape word that has something to do with, I think, like land with river flowing through it or something. And we know there are rivers in Parsippany. I grew up in Manahawkin, which was the land of good corn, right? Lenni Lenape also. Remember the Lenni Lenape traveled between North and South Jersey because of the seasons down what's now like Route 206. But also there were sort of like a southern and a central and there were different subsets of the Lenni Lenape in New Jersey. But some people think that it might have meant something else, that inside land of good corn. I think it's like land that flows into the waters or something, being it's from the shore. So just to show you, we're always learning and evaluating. Also important to language and place is how many languages are spoken in one place, and then how many of those languages are recognized or encouraged, or are any discouraged, right? We looked at the road sign earlier this week from Ireland, from County Cork, of the sign that was written both in English and in Gaelic, right? In the United States, do we see signs written in more than one language? Not too often. In Canada, you might see some written in French Canada, in French and English, or some even just in French, right? Some European countries, you'll see things in 5 different languages. So keep in mind what all of this reflects about our culture as well. There's an example in this unit. If someone is from Mexico, you cannot assume that they always speak Spanish. There may be indigenous languages that they speak predominantly instead, right? So you can never make these assumptions. So we're going to talk about the forces in culture. We have centripetal forces that unite a culture and centrifugal forces that add tension to it. Now, these are, once again, not like, a magic wand. If you have these forces, you are a unified country, right? Or vice versa. But it's things to think about. If you have a common language, that is also often a centripetal force that unites a culture. Does that mean it's bad that there's more than one language? No, right? But this is just a factor that often unites a people. There's usually a strong sense of nationalism, right? Remember, there's a danger, like too much nationalism can lead to ethnocentrism or xenophobia, but that does not mean that having a pride in a nation is necessarily a bad thing, right? If it's checked, right? So for example, you can look at the Olympics, and here you see a lot of centripetal forces, people really embracing a culture, embracing their nation. Often a centripetal force will also be a certain sameness between an ethnicity or between a religious group. So once again, in the United States, we sort of pride ourselves in our diversity. E pluribus unum, out of many, one, right? But that doesn't mean we're one complete culture either. We do have an overarching culture, but there's lots of subcultures within it, right? That doesn't mean that there's still a sense of nationalism and pride when Team USA gathers at the Olympics. So I just don't want you to think that one's always good and one's always bad, is I guess what I'm saying. Centrifugal forces are ones that can often divide a nation or divide a culture, right? So ethnic discrimination. If you're going to discriminate against a group, well, that's often not a uniting factor. That's sort of common sense. Political unrest or division, right? Once again, that doesn't mean everyone is going to politically agree on everything. But if it's like, can it cause divide? There's a lot of political polarization in our country now. So you might be like, ooh, this is not a unifying factor. Could it be? Well, sure, it could be, even without everyone agreeing the same. But what needs to happen for that to get there? If there are lots of human rights violations, and human rights could be over ethnic groups, religion, gender, the list goes on and on. But if you see a lot of violations, that could really disrupt a culture, or economic inequality. It's very difficult to have complete economic equality, but if you have very high levels of poverty, for example, that's going to usually do more to cause disruption instead of unify it. This is an example from today about war in the Sudan, about different ethnic conflicts within that country that make it hard to really stay unified, right? It's really pulling the nation apart, pulling its culture in different directions. Let's talk about some examples. Kurdistan. If you don't know who the Kurds are, or if you've never heard of Kurdistan, that's something AP might expect you to know. So you might want to spend a few minutes. Let's go Wikipedia this, right? There is no one Kurdistan, right? But it is an ethnic group that are ethnically homogeneous, religiously homogeneous, have a common history, but they don't have a country. And there's no law in the world that says every ethnic and religious culture must have their own sovereign nation, right? So Kurdistan, like the people of Kurdistan, live in several countries. So this article from today is about Iraqi Kurdistan. So you see that part in northern Iraq, they actually do have their own prime minister. And you see some cultural differences within the society there, where they're saying, hey, in Iraq, there's a new child marriage law, and it says the legal age of marriage was lowered to the age of 9. We can talk about that in culture and gender, and that's a whole other discussion we can have. But the Kurdistani prime minister is saying that's a setback for women's rights, probably for children's rights, right? So even though he doesn't control all of Iraq, all right, he's still voicing his opinion on behalf of the Kurds. Another example, we should all know, hopefully, we've learned a little bit of Cold War history by now, and we know that there are 2 different Koreas. There's a North Korea and a South Korea. Though the people are physically homogeneous, right, ethnically homogeneous, religious in many different ways, language, history if you go back far enough, but then comes the Cold War and not a common history anymore. And now you have a lot of these centrifugal forces, and a lot of it is political. And this article is that one of these forces is that South Korea is allied with the United States and other democratic countries, and North Korea allied with Russia. So North Korea supporting Russia in the Ukraine war, also sending over some people there. There have been North Koreans killed. So this is a Newsweek article. It says Russia has issued a warning to South Korea against sending arms to the Ukraine. Seoul, which is, oh no, wait, that's not Seoul, that's Seoul. South Korea is considering sending arms to Ukraine in response to North Korea dispatching troops to Russia. In October, South Korea warned that they would consider this, a statement that was purported to pressure Russia against bringing North Korean troops for its war. So, potentially escalating this war may be a concern of ours. But we see the different centrifugal forces going on here in the Koreas. Other influences of place you want to think about is ethnicity. Are there multiple ethnicities in this place? And maybe that's what makes it a place, right? That there are right? We go back to like Philadelphia's history. It was a very ethnically diverse place, religiously diverse place, one of the most so in the early colonial days. So that was almost part of its culture. Whereas many cultures, they're going to be based more on their ethnic homogeneity or their religious as well. Can religion and ethnicity can also influence who lives there? So if you know also about the history with India and Pakistan or Bangladesh, right, that a lot of the people used to live in the other place, but then once they became separate. Uh, India is not exclusively Hindu, and Pakistan, for example, not exclusively Muslim, but it is a huge factor, right? And it caused a lot of movement between. You can also have ethnic enclaves within places, and that can influence the activities that go on there, right? Like we've talked about Chinatown, for example. I wanted to show you also some religious toponyms that are in New Jersey. So we mentioned some indigenous ones, but in New Jersey we have Bethlehem, we have Tabernacle, Jericho, Zion, Zarephath. So all named after um, Christian places that shows a little bit of its culture, mostly Protestant history, even though there's lots of Catholic history in New Jersey. In Morris County, we have Mount Tabor, and that if you learned in US one about like the Great Awakenings and the revival camps, that's exactly where Mount Tabor's history comes from and where it got its name. So to conclude today, I'm going to ask you to do something. I want to see this at the bottom of your notes. I'm going to check if you want full credit. I want you to think of New Jersey and how we're going to remove the Central Jersey element here. But if you were some people divided by North Jersey and South Jersey. So what do you think are forces or cultural forces that unite New Jersey into one state? Or what do you think are some centrifugal characteristics that divide us into a North and South? So I'll give you like a silly example. The Taylor ham or egg roll or pork roll debate, right? Centrifugal force, it is Taylor ham up north, it is pork roll in the south, right? What could be a unifying one? Think of after a hurricane when it affected the whole state, you had the stronger than the storm, right? So I'll give you one of each. Think of three more of each. Feel free to look things up. Feel free to talk to your classmates. Just don't talk to them when you show up in the morning and be like, oh, I didn't do this part. All right. But I want to see some fun and different ideas. Okay. We will talk about cultural diffusion next. So stay tuned and happy Thanksgiving week, everybody.